Welcome to my third series, Influencers, on the intellectuals who would challenge revealed spiritual knowledge and reject appeals to authority in favor of scientific observations and logic. The biographies and information presented in these videos are extracted from my books in progress, Sins of the Fathers and Dangerous Ideas. Before we get to these influencers, first I need to present the contextual background that laid the foundations for these later mavericks to shine. Then the biographies will follow chronologically, at least for the first batch, as future videos noted throughout the first series will be out of sequence. In 529, the Emperor Justinian compiled many existing imperial decrees of previous emperors and issued a set of laws known as the Code of Justinian. The Codex marginalized anyone who was not a member of the Catholic or universal faith and prohibited them from drawing a public salary as a teacher. The new law was meant to silence not only heretical Christian sects, but also the lingering polytheist adherents. The remaining pagan philosophers, such as Simplicius, left the Byzantine Empire for Persia, and some scholars regard the issuing of the Codex and its prohibitions as the end of classical antiquity. Justinian's Codex would have many follow-on repercussions that we'll come back to, but let's jump ahead 200 years to Charlemagne and his monumental impact on the history of Western Europe and the world, just not the impact he was aiming for. Charlemagne desired a strong, pious kingdom that emphasized conversion or an increased commitment of people within his domains to Christianity, and he recognized the need for having a literate and capable army of trained men and priests for administering the empire. So, in 789, he issued the Admonitio Generalis, which, among other things, called for every monastery and cathedral to create a school. One aspect of this program was the rebirth of the manuscript tradition that had lain dormant since the collapse of Imperial Rome during the Gothic Wars and Lombard invasion of the 6th century, and it was from this period that most surviving manuscripts came. Those schools followed the curriculum first established by the ancient Greeks and catalogued by a North African contemporary of Augustine's, Martianus Capella, in his book On the Marriage of Philology and Mercury, which emphasized the 7 liberal arts, the quadrivium of astronomy, mathematics, geometry, and music, and the trivium of rhetoric, grammar, and logic. The cathedral schools were the forerunners of universities, which became centers of intellectual activity that continually pushed the boundaries of knowledge beyond the revealed certainties of Christianity. As with many important decisions, Charlemagne's reforms were subject to the law of unintended consequences. The creation of schools to train priests ultimately led to a spirit of critical thinking in universities that resulted in the emergence of secular societies, which eroded the authority of religious institutions in the Christian states the schools were intended to strengthen. It is to the Islamic Golden Age that we turn to next for more contextual background, as a mountain of Muslim scholarship would start making its way back to European universities in the 12th and 13th centuries. The end of the Islamic Golden Age is difficult to date accurately, given the attitudes to the pursuit of knowledge prevalent in different regions across the vast domains under Islamic rule. Some scholars point to Al-Ghazali, who died in 1111, and his attacks on philosophy that were detracting from the proper worship of Allah as the start of the decline marked by a rejection of secular knowledge and the turning inwards to entirely theological matters, as had happened in Christian Europe. Some scholars claim it came to an end with the siege of Baghdad in 1258 by the Mongols, while others note that it lasted centuries longer in Central Asia under the Timurid Renaissance from 1370 to the 1500s. In Samarkand, on the Silk Road in modern-day Uzbekistan, the scholar Sultan Ulugh Beg was an accomplished mathematician and astronomer who built one of the greatest observatories in the Islamic world, and from which he made a highly accurate calculation of the solar year, off by just 1 minute and 2 seconds from modern observations. However, the Golden Age began under the patronage of the Abbasid Caliphate, roughly around 750 contemporary with Charlemagne. It was here that a group of Christians known as Nestorians found tolerance outside the Roman Empire, and they were the critical players who preserved the Greek scholarship that made its way back to Europe from the libraries in Toledo in modern-day Spain. It was these Syriac Christians who made the translations first from Greek into Syriac for their theological debates with fellow Christians, then from Syriac into Arabic, primarily at the House of Wisdom in Baghdad during the Islamic Golden Age. Further, McCulloch notes it was a Christian scholar named Severus in the 7th century who incorporated Indian mathematical symbols that went on to be used in the Arabic numerals. A particularly important event for Islamic scholarship occurred in 751 at the Battle of Talas in modern-day Kyrgyzstan between the Tang Chinese and Abbasid armies. The Abbasid forces defeated the Tangs, which had two impacts. One, Central Asia has remained Muslim ever since, and two, among the captive Chinese soldiers were craftsmen who knew the secret of Chinese papermaking. The ultimate result of this Abbasid victory is that Samarkand became the leading center of paper production for the Muslim world, and paper provided the means for the prolific dissemination of knowledge that is the hallmark of the Islamic Golden Age. Advances in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and more spanned the Islamic world from the steppes of Central Asia to the Iberian Peninsula and the great libraries of Toledo, Cordoba, and Granada, libraries containing the works of classical antiquity that would fundamentally alter the course of European scientific and intellectual development. A windfall of Islamic scholarship came to the rest of Europe after the city of Toledo surrendered to a Christian king in 1085. What the new Christian occupiers of the city found in the libraries of Toledo changed the world forever. Mountains of scientific learning from the Islamic Golden Age, along with the texts of classical antiquity that the Syriac Christians had translated and Muslim scholars preserved, began to be translated into Latin and started flooding into the cathedral schools from the libraries in Spain over the next century, transforming these institutions into universities. An additional element from the Muslim world was also borrowed by the European universities absorbing all this new information: the creation of professorships, lectures, robes, and earning a degree in a specialized subject matter. Following Bologna, Oxford and the University of Paris, known mainly by the name of its theology school, the Sorbonne, were also established in the late 11th and mid-12th centuries, respectively. While the liberal arts were still in high demand, history professor James Brundage notes that law and philosophy were becoming the most popular courses of study, with law getting a particular boost from the rediscovery of Justinian's legal codices in Bologna around 1070, and the University of Bologna became a leading center of law studies. For those interested in the details of the translations that came from Muslim Spain, I recommend you read Richard Rubinstein's book, Aristotle's Children. For an all-encompassing summary of the events and impacts of Muslim scholarship, watch the brilliant documentary by James Burke, The Day the Universe Changed, Episode 2, In the Light of the Above, Medieval Conflict, Faith, and Reason. With this background, we move to our first influencer in the next video, a Muslim scholar who would have a big impact on Europe's exposure to Aristotle. If you like my content, please like and subscribe to get notified of new videos. Please also consider supporting my work by becoming a Patreon sponsor. You can also find me on the following platforms: